A sheltered respite Harrison's guest house turned out to be a charming cottage nestled at the edge of his sprawling Brookline estate. Olivia stood in the center of the living room, Melody balanced on her hip, taking in the warm wood floors, plush furniture, fully stocked kitchen. "This is excessive," she murmured, as Harrison set down her violin case and the small bag of belongings he'd retrieved from her former apartment. "It's vacant most of the year," Harrison replied with a casual shrug that didn't quite match the careful way his eyes tracked her movements. "My sister used to stay here when she visited before she moved to Europe." Dr. Eleanor Patel, Harrison's physician who had examined Olivia and Melody the previous evening, had diagnosed Olivia with malnutrition and exhaustion. 2 weeks of proper meals and rest she'd prescribed with a gentle but firm tone that brooked no argument. "I can't impose for 2 weeks," Olivia said, absently swaying to soothe Melody. Harrison moved toward the kitchen, opening the refrigerator to reveal shelves stocked with fresh food, considered a mutually beneficial arrangement. "I need someone to house-sit this cottage periodically, make sure everything stays in working order." He glanced back at her. "You're a musician." Olivia's hand drifted to her violin case. Boston Philharmonic, second chair until budget cuts last year. She didn't mention the spiral that followed the increasingly sparse gigs. The mounting bills, the slow slide from her comfortable apartment to a series of ever shabbier rooms, until finally the streets loomed. "The piano in the corner works if you'd like to practice," Harrison offered. "It might help having background music while I work. My office is in the main house, but I can hear from there." A baby monitor sat on the counter, its twin presumably in Harrison's possession. "For safety," he'd explained, in case Olivia needed anything while he was working. That first night, after settling Melody in the nursery that had appeared mysteriously, furnished with everything an infant might need, Olivia stood under the shower's hot spray until her fingers pruned, washing away weeks of accumulated stress. She slept for 12 uninterrupted hours, waking only when sunlight streamed through gauzy curtains. The days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Mornings, Harrison would bring coffee and fresh pastries from a bakery in town. He worked long hours. In his home office, emerging occasionally to check on them or take business calls in the garden, Olivia noticed he always stepped far from the house for these calls. Speaking too quietly to overhear, by the end of the first week, Melody had become inexplicably attached to Harrison. The typically shy baby would light up at his approach, reaching pudgy arms toward him whenever he entered the room. "She has excellent taste," Harrison commented one evening as he gently bounced Melody on his knee. "Musicians tend to recognize quality when they see it." Olivia smiled despite herself. "Is that what you are? Quality?" "I aspire to be," he replied with unexpected seriousness. That night, Olivia found herself playing violin for the first time. In months, she chose Debussy, letting the dreamy notes float through the cottage. When she finished, she noticed Harrison standing in the doorway, an unreadable expression on his face. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. "Thank you for the strings," she replied, nodding toward the fresh set he'd left on the coffee table. "That morning, mine were worn thin." Harrison stepped further into the room. "I have connections at the Boston Symphony Orchestra. They're holding auditions next month for a special spring series." Olivia's heart quickened, then sank. "I can't prepare properly in a month." "And Melody, they have excellent childcare for performers," Harrison countered. "And you have a place to practice?" He gestured around the cottage. "Stay prepared. At least try. Why do you care?" The question had been building for days. Harrison was silent for a long moment. "Music was important to my family. My mother was a cellist." "Was she?" "Died when I was young." His expression closed like a book snapping shut. He glanced at his watch and expensive timepiece that seemed at odds with his otherwise understated appearance. "It's late. I should let you rest." That night, Olivia woke to the sound of voices. Male voices, speaking in urgent tones outside the cottage. Peering through the curtains, she saw Harrison standing with 2 men in dark suits. One handed him a thick envelope. Harrison nodded tersely before the men departed in a black sedan with tinted windows. When she checked on Melody afterward, she found a small, exquisite music box on the nightstand that hadn't been there before. It played a haunting melody she didn't recognize. Underneath, a handwritten note read simply, "For the youngest musician in residence." Olivia turned the music box over in her hands, a chill running down her spine despite the cottage's warmth. Harrison Wells, she was beginning to realize, was not simply a wealthy Good Samaritan with an empty guest house. The question was, who was he really, and what was she and Melody becoming entangled with? Whispers and shadows, February arrived with biting winds and the heaviest snowfall Boston had seen in decades. Olivia's audition for the symphony was 2 weeks away, and her practice sessions had intensified. Harrison had taken to watching Melody. In the evenings, allowing Olivia uninterrupted hours with her violin. It was during one such session that she noticed the sedan again black, nondescript except for its government issue plates, idling at the end of Harrison's driveway before slowly pulling away. Later that night, muffled voices drifted from Harrison's study in the main house. Olivia hadn't intended to eavesdrop, but as she returned from retrieving sheet music from the piano, Harrison's voice carried clearly through the cracked window. "They're getting closer, Vincent. The protocols aren't holding. No, I won't relocate again. Not now." A pause. "Because I have responsibilities here." His voice had dropped, but the next words reached her clearly. "You're safe with me. I've taken precautions." A chill that had nothing to do with the winter air crept up Olivia's spine. Was he talking about her and Melody? The next morning, Harrison appeared at the cottage with dark circles under his eyes and a forced smile that didn't reach them. "I need to go away for a few days," he announced, setting down a bag of groceries. "Business in New York. You'll have everything you need here. Is everything all right?" Olivia asked, bouncing Melody on her hip. Harrison's smile faltered. "Of course, just routine meetings." He reached out to chuck Melody under her chin, earning a delighted gurgle. "Practice well while I'm gone. You're nearly ready." After he left, Olivia found a sealed envelope on the kitchen counter containing $2,000 in cash and a note, "Emergency fund. Use if needed." That evening, Olivia put Melody to bed early and did something she'd been contemplating for weeks. She explored the main house. Harrison had given her a key in case of emergencies, but she'd never used it until now. The mansion was pristine but strangely impersonal, like a museum where nothing was quite meant to be touched. No family photos adorned the walls. No personal mementos cluttered the surfaces. In the study, she found a locked filing cabinet and a computer requiring multiple passwords. What she did find, tucked behind a false panel in the bookshelf that she discovered only by accident, was a small safe containing multiple passports. The one on top bore Harrison's photograph but a different name, Thomas Blackwood. Olivia's hand trembled as she replaced everything exactly as she'd found it and retreated to the cottage. The next morning, she searched online for Thomas Blackwood and found scattered references to a cybersecurity expert who had worked for a defense contractor called Sentinel Technologies until 3 years ago, when he had vanished completely from public record. Further searching revealed headlines from that time: "Whistleblower exposes," "Illegal surveillance program Sentinel Tech under federal investigation, Thomas Blackwood, Hero O or traitor." The accompanying photo, though younger and with different styling, was unmistakably Harrison. Olivia spent the next 2 days in a fog of confusion and betrayal, practicing mechanically while her mind raced. Who was she living with? A criminal? A hero? Someone in between? On the third night, she was awakened by the security system's quiet chime, the signal that someone had entered the property. Expecting Harrison's return, she peered out the window to see not his familiar Tesla, but 2 unfamiliar figures moving stealthily across the snow-covered lawn toward the main house. Heart pounding, Olivia grabbed Melody from her crib and retreated to the panic room Harrison had casually shown her in case of severe weather. A small reinforced space concealed behind the pantry. Inside was a monitor showing security camera feeds from around the property. She watched in horror as the men broke into the main house, methodically searching each room. They wore no masks, their movements professional and practiced. One spoke into a radio, words she couldn't hear. Just as they approached the study with its hidden safe headlights swept the driveway, Harrison's car had returned. Olivia clutched Melody tighter, torn between warning him and protecting her child. But before she could decide, something unexpected happened on the monitor. Harrison didn't enter the house. Instead, he approached directly from the side, as if he'd known about the intruders all along. What happened next occurred with such swift precision that Olivia could barely process it. Harrison disabled both men with what looked like military-trained efficiency, securing them with zip ties before making a call on a secure-looking phone that wasn't his usual one. 20 minutes later, a different black sedan arrived. Two people emerged, a woman in a tailored suit and a man with a government bearing. They spoke briefly with Harrison before taking the intruders away. When the property was clear, Harrison stood in the falling snow, looking directly at the security camera, and by extension, at Olivia. "It's safe now," he said quietly, as if he knew exactly where she was watching from. "But we need to talk." Harmony restored. The Boston Symphony Hall gleamed under spotlights, its gilded interior a cathedral to perfect acoustics and centuries of musical tradition. Backstage, Olivia adjusted her black concert dress, fingers unusually steady as she lifted her violin. 3 days had passed since the night of revelations. 3 days of Thomas's security team establishing a protective perimeter, of learning to spot surveillance and counter-surveillance, of understanding just how deep the conspiracy against him went, and by extension, against her and Melody. 2 minutes, Ms. Reed, the stage manager announced, in the green room nearby. Melody was being watched by Dr. Eleanor Patel, who, Olivia now knew, was not merely a physician but a former intelligence operative, and Thomas's most trusted ally. Thomas himself stood in the shadows of the backstage area, scanning the audience through a small gap in the curtains. He wore a tuxedo that made him look like any other patron of the arts, though Olivia knew he carried 2 concealed weapons and wore a bulletproof vest beneath the fine tailoring. "The commissioner is here," he murmured as she approached. Row, center. Federal Security Commissioner Gabrielle Martinez, the woman Thomas suspected had ordered his handler's execution. "Is this a good idea?" Olivia whispered. The audition was their planned distraction while Thomas's allies accessed Martinez's private servers. "It's too late to change course," Thomas replied. His eyes softened as they met hers. "You look beautiful." She could respond. The stage manager gestured. Olivia stepped onto the brilliantly lit stage. Momentarily blinded by the transition from darkness, she had chosen Barber's Violin Concerto, its opening movement, deceptively gentle before building to a technical tour de force that few violinists could master. As she began to play, the hall fell silent save for her instrument's voice. Midway through the piece, Olivia noticed a subtle movement in the audience. Commissioner Martinez had received a text. The woman frowned, then rose and slipped out a side door, followed by 2 bodyguards. Thomas had disappeared from the wings. Olivia continued playing, the music flowing through her like electricity. She poured every emotion of the past months into her performance: the desperation, the fear, the unexpected refuge, the betrayal, and finally, the strange new trust that had formed in the crucible of danger. When she finished, the hall erupted in applause. The judging panel stood, a rare honor for an audition. Through tear-blurred eyes, Olivia saw Eleanor enter from the side, carrying Melody, who clapped her tiny hands in unconscious mimicry of the crowd. But Thomas was nowhere to be seen. Hours later, after accepting the position with the orchestra and navigating a reception filled with congratulations, Olivia returned to the cottage with Eleanor and Melody, a sense of dread growing with each passing minute of Thomas's absence. "He should have contacted us by now," Eleanor said, checking her secure phone for the 10th time. At midnight, headlights swept the driveway. Both women tensed, Eleanor moving to the security panel, while Olivia clutched Melody closer. The door opened to reveal Thomas, his tuxedo torn, a bruise darkening his jaw, but very much alive. "It's over," he announced quietly. "Martinez is in custody. The evidence has been turned over to trustworthy agents at the Justice Department." Eleanor exhaled sharply. "The kill order? Rescinded, and I've been officially cleared." A tired smile crossed his face. Thomas Blackwood can exist again. Later, when Eleanor had gone and Melody slept soundly, Thomas and Olivia sat on the cottage porch, watching the stars emerge above the snow-covered garden. "What happens now?" Olivia asked. "Now I rebuild my life," Thomas replied. "My real life? And us?" The question hung in the cold air. Thomas turned to her, uncertainty replacing his usual confidence that depends on you. "I've arranged an apartment. Near Symphony Hall, full security system, proximity to childcare. You'll have the fellowship salary, plus royalties from patents that are being restored to my name." "You're setting us free," Olivia realized. "I'm giving you a choice," he corrected. "You never had one before, not with me." Olivia thought of the past months, of music rediscovered, of Melody's laughter, of late-night conversations that had evolved from cautious to intimate, of a man who had protected them even when his methods were questionable. "And if I choose to stay?" she asked quietly. "Not in the cottage, not as your cover, but with you, wherever that might be." Thomas looked at her with wonder. "You would consider that after everything?" "I've learned something these past months," Olivia said, reaching for his hand. "Safety isn't about walls or security systems. It's about having someone who will move heaven and earth to protect what matters." She thought of her daughter, sleeping peacefully inside. "Melody adores you, and I." She hesitated, then continued with the same courage that had carried her. "Through her audition, I've fallen in love with you." Both versions, Harrison Wells, the kind benefactor, and Thomas Blackwood, the complicated hero. Thomas's hand tightened around hers. "I never expected to find a family when I came back to Boston." "Is that what we are?" Olivia asked. "A family?" Instead of answering, Thomas drew her closer. Above them, the first notes of a spring symphony were written in stars across the clearing sky, as inside, a baby slept soundly. No longer a prop in someone else's story, but the beginning of a new one composed not of deception, but of truth. Not of fear, but of love. As Thomas finally whispered against her hair, "If you'll have me, that's exactly what we are." In the distance, city lights twinkled like an audience, awaiting the next movement of their story, one they would write together in perfect harmony. Shattered Symphony, the first snowfall of December, blanketed Boston in white, transforming the city into a glistening wonderland that belied the bitter cold. Olivia Reed clutched her violin case in one hand, and her 8-month-old daughter Melody against her chest with the other, the baby bundled in layers that weren't quite thick enough for the plummeting temperatures. "Just a little further, sweet girl," Olivia whispered, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The weight of her instrument, once a comfort, now felt like an anchor dragging her down. 3 days since her last meal, anything beyond the scraps she'd saved for Melody's formula and her vision begun to blur around the edges. The eviction notice had come 2 weeks ago. The sympathy orchestra gig she'd counted on had fallen through yesterday. Her phone service had been cut that morning. Each step along Newbury Street felt heavier than the last as shoppers bustled past. Oblivious to her struggle, Melody whimpered against her chest, sensing her mother's distress. Olivia tried to hum a lullaby, but the notes died in her throat as a wave of dizziness washed over her. She stumbled, reaching for a nearby lamppost to steady herself. Her fingers, once nimble enough to dance across violin strings in Premiere concert halls, now felt numb and clumsy. "Ma'am, are you all right?" someone asked from somewhere far away. The world tilted. Olivia felt Melody slipping from her grasp as her knees buckled. In her last conscious moment, she was aware only of her desperate attempt to cradle her daughter's head as they both fell. "Then nothing, miss. Can you hear me?" Olivia blinked awake to find herself sitting on a bench, her back against a storefront. Melody was no longer in her arms, and panic surged through her. "My baby," she gasped, struggling to rise. "She's right here," came a calm, deep voice. "She's perfectly safe." Through clearing vision, Olivia saw a tall man kneeling before her. He wore an expensive charcoal overcoat dusted with snowflakes, and in his arms, Melody cooed contentedly. Behind him, a small crowd had gathered, though he seemed to be keeping them at a respectful distance. "I've called for help," he said, eyes the color of weathered steel meeting hers. "You collapsed. I managed to catch your daughter before she fell." Olivia reached for Melody, and the man gently transferred the baby back to her arms. Relief flooded through her as she checked her daughter for any injuries, finding none. "Thank you," she whispered, shame burning through her exhaustion. "I just got dizzy for a moment." The man studied her with an unnerving intensity. "When did you last eat?" Olivia looked away. "I'm fine." He reached into his coat and produced a protein bar. "Please, take it." Pride warred with necessity, and necessity won. Olivia accepted the bar with trembling fingers. The man produced a bottle of water next, opening it for her when her hands proved too unsteady. "I'm Harrison," he said simply. "Addison Wells." "Olivia Reed," she replied between desperate bites, "and this is Melody." Harrison's expression softened. As he looked at the baby, "The ambulance should be here shortly." "No," Olivia said sharply. "No ambulance. I can't afford." She stopped herself, humiliation coloring her cheeks. Harrison considered her for a long moment, then nodded. "I understand, but you need medical attention. Would you allow me to take you to my personal physician? No hospitals, no paperwork, no cost to you." Sirens wailed in the distance. "Why would you do that?" Olivia asked, suspicion threading through her gratitude. Something flickered in Harrison's eyes, a shadow of memory perhaps. "Because someone once did something similar for me when I needed it most." The ambulance rounded the corner. Harrison stood, offering his hand to Olivia. "You don't have to trust me," he said quietly. "Please, let me help you both." Melody gurgled and reached a tiny hand toward Harrison's scarf. In that moment, with snow falling around them and strangers watching from a distance, Olivia made a choice that would change everything. She took his hand. The truth unraveled. The cottage kitchen felt too small for the magnitude of truths being revealed. Melody slept peacefully in her crib, monitored by a system far more sophisticated than a standard baby monitor. As Olivia now understood, Harrison, or Thomas, as she now knew him, sat across from her, hands wrapped around a mug of untouched tea. The calm, controlled benefactor was gone, replaced by a man whose eyes constantly scanned for threats, whose shoulders carried a visible weight. "I was the lead security architect at Sentinel Technologies," he explained, voice low and steady. "We designed surveillance systems for the government, legal ones, or so I believed, and I discovered project oversight." He described finding evidence of a domestic spying program that violated countless privacy laws, a system capable of monitoring any American citizen without warrants or oversight. And I realized what we'd built. I gathered evidence and went to the Federal Security Commission. Some there wanted to bury it, others wanted to prosecute. In the end, I was offered witness protection in exchange for testimony. "Those men tonight," Olivia said, connecting pieces, "they weren't random burglars." Thomas shook his head. "Former Sentinel operatives. The company was dismantled after the scandal, but some of its founders formed private security firms. Been hunting me ever since." "Why not change your identity completely? Move overseas?" "I did initially." Bitter smile crossed his face. Thomas Blackwood ceased to exist. Harrison Wells was born with a new history, new credentials. "I moved to Switzerland for 2 years. What brought you back?" His expression darkened. "My handler from witness protection was killed in what was made to look like a robbery. I came back to investigate privately. That's when I saw you." Olivia felt cold despite the kitchen's warmth. "You didn't help me by accident." "No," he admitted. "I'd been watching you for weeks before you collapsed. Because your former neighbor was on Sentinel's payroll. Your apartment was directly below a surveillance post, monitoring a federal judge. When you were evicted, I needed to ensure you weren't collateral damage, or worse, being targeted because of what you might have inadvertently seen or heard." Olivia stood abruptly, chair scraping across the floor. "You've been using us as cover? A violinist and her baby, the perfect, normal fafada, while you conduct your investigation." "Initially, yes," Thomas acknowledged, not flinching from her anger, "but it became more than that. You and Melody, he faltered, you became people I cared about protecting, not assets." "How can I believe anything you say now?" "You shouldn't," he said simply. "But you should know that those men tonight weren't looking for me. They were looking for evidence I'd collected about who killed my handler. In the process, they would have found information about you and Melody." A chill ran through Olivia. What kind of information? Your background check? Security assessments? Proof that you're innocent bystanders. He leaned forward. They found that. They'd know you're important to me. They would use you. The implication hung in the air between them. We need to leave, Thomas continued. Tonight I have safe. Houses no. Olivia's voice was firm. My audition is in 4 days. I'm not running. This isn't a game, Olivia. Neither is my life or Melody's. She crossed her arms. You dragged us into this. You can protect us while I finish what? I started. Thomas studied her, surprise giving way to something like respect. It would mean round-the-clock security, restrictions on your movements, and immediately afterward we would need to relocate. After my audition, I'll consider your offer, Olivia countered. But I make no promises beyond that point. For a long moment, they regarded each other across the kitchen table, a woman who had lost everything once and refused to run from her second chance, and a man who had been running for so long he'd forgotten how to stand still. For days, Thomas finally agreed. But there's something else you should know. He hesitated. The symphony position, I didn't just hear about it. I helped fund this special series with the specific requirement that they hold open auditions. Eyes widened. You created the opportunity for me? Why? Because I heard you play that first night in the cottage, Thomas said quietly, and the world deserves to hear you too. Before Olivia could respond, his security phone buzzed. Thomas checked it, expression darkening. They found my handler's killer, he said. It's worse than I thought. Conspiracy goes higher than Sentinel All, the way to the federal security. Commission itself. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the footprints of the night's intruders, while inside. Olivia realized that the safety she'd felt in the cottage had always been an illusion, and yet, paradoxically, she had never felt more secure than in this moment of terrible truth.